with all of the move to digital education, to what extent does the faculty member matter, even in the digital space? And my thinking on that is that the faculty member plays a vital role. I mean, if you look, for instance, just as one data point, at those scientists who say won the Nobel Prize, a significant fraction of them, I don't remember the exact number, but it's large, a significant fraction had a Nobel Prize winner as their advisor. Right? So having somebody who has great insight into not just, the technical aspects of these ideas, not just, the big ideas, but someone who can take you by the hand and lead you through the intricacies of these abstract ideas, I think that's a vital part of the education, a vital part of absorbing the ideas in a deeper way, so that you can't just, answer the questions on the exam, but you really have an intuition about how they work. And I don't think, obviously you can get that intuition in many different ways, but I think the most efficient and effective way of doing that is to have a guide who's really right there with you. You can see that person and feel that there's a trust between the two of you. And that allows you to get through those difficult moments as you're trying to understand quantum mechanics or general relativity or even special relativity. These ideas are hard because they're so unfamiliar. And having a familiar hand that takes you through it, I think, makes the learning process all that much more effective and efficient.
Let's talk about some of the notes that you hit or that you try to hit when you do that in your own work. I'd like to read you a quote actually from something that you wrote.
Always frightening.
No. It says, how do you engage, excuse me.
That was what you wrote.
Yeah, that was what I wrote.
Okay.
There we go.
It sounded like Gideon.
Allow me, just give me one moment. You said, we rob science education of life when we focus solely on results and seek to train students to solve problems and recite facts without a commensurate emphasis on transporting them out beyond the stars. Is it only a sense of awe or only a sense of wonder with which you can communicate some of these higher concepts in science?
No. So that quote, I don't remember where it came from.
You had written an op-ed.
It does sound familiar, though.
Yeah,
which
we
is
all
good.
know exactly.
But I'm pretty sure what I was referring to there, especially if it was an op-ed, is that when you're talking about younger students, and you want to keep them interested in science. We always talk about get them interested in science. No. They start interested in science when they're 3 or 4 or 5, right? They smash things together. They want to know how things work. They're constantly asking why this, why that. They start as scientists. If you want to keep that interest alive, you need to keep the big ideas front and center, as opposed to just, can you solve that equation or remember the parts of the cell or balance that chemical reaction? All vital things. I'm not saying throw away the details. I am absolutely 100% behind the rigor of science and science education. But to keep the student interested in the details, you've got to show them why the details matter. So at that level, the awe and wonder is important. But when you go further on in the educational process, when you're talking, say, to the undergraduate science major or the graduate student, they're already there, right? You don't need to keep them excited or interested. They've got the motivation. Then when we're talking about how do you train them in the most effective way, then it relates to the thing that we were talking about earlier. Having somebody who can be with them for that journey is a vital part of the education.
When you do your books and your lectures, or you look to do albums or polydisciplinary performances, where do you start? What's the initial idea that you seek to connect with?
It depends on the project, enormously. But just to be concrete, there's this project that we did actually with the World Science Festival, so Tracy here produced a project called Icarus at the Edge of Time, which was kind of an unusual melding together of story, science, music, and film. So this is just a 30-second background, is a story that I wrote about sort of a reimagining in a futuristic sense of the myth of Icarus, the boy doesn't have wax wings and against his father's advice fly near the sun. That's original, of course. In this case, the father says, don't take your rocket ship and go to a black hole. And nevertheless, this futuristic Icarus does that. And unlike the original, where of course the wax wings melt and the boy dies, in this version, it's Einstein's general relativity that dictates how the story unfolds. The boy goes to a black hole, hangs out there for just a few hours, but the real physics that Einstein taught us is that time slows down near the edge of a black hole. So even though it was just a few hours for him, when he comes back to show his dad what he's done, he quickly learns that it's 10,000 years into the future, and his dad has been dead for 10,000 years. So it's a sort of different version of the story, but one that is driven by science. And in that particular case, that was the key thing for me. I wanted to try to create something where you wouldn't feel someone's lecturing to you about general relativity. You wouldn't feel like someone's trying to really teach it to you. You just kind of go on an enjoyable journey, and by virtue of going on that journey, you just kind of absorb the science. That was the point there. And one of the key things too was, this started as a book, but then we turned it into this stage performance because music and film are such a great way of going right through to the body. You don't have to sort of go through the head, the thinking, the cognitive part, which is always what we associate with science. I wanted science to kind of penetrate immediately, and having music and film was a vital part of making that happen.
When you talk, though, about film being a way to kind of access people emotionally, through the body, I'm going to quote Aristotle by way of the film mogul Harry Cohn, which is, you either make the audience laugh or you make the audience cry. Blowing the audience's mind and giving them a renewed sense of wonder about the world around them, that's icing on the cake if you can get there. How would you take the scientific discoveries that you're working on the forefront of in physics, and actually, are there narratives besides just the mythic that you can apply towards daily life?
You can, but let me just go back to that
Sure.
that directive that you mentioned there, because when the book version of the story
Sure.
came out, and the publisher sent us copies. It was actually dedicated to my son, and my father's no longer living. But my son was, I guess, 5 at the time when the book came, and I didn't want to give him this book, this story, for fear that he would be like, oh, it's another one of Dad's things. He always, makes me read his books. I didn't want it to turn into that kind of a dynamic. So I wanted him to kind of come to the book on his own. So I kind of left the book around the house. Many copies I left,
Subtle,
around the
subtle.
house. And he did find one copy, and he asked my wife to read it to him, and she did. And at the end, he was crying, right? And some people asked me, well, didn't that make you feel bad that you wrote the story that made your son cry? And he was crying because the dad is dead at the end of the story. And yeah, at some level, I felt bad, but really I was thrilled. And I was thrilled because if a story based on Einstein's general theory of relativity can make a 5-year-old cry, I think that's a good thing, because science becomes more than, again, just the facts and the figures and the solving the equations. It becomes something where you really think about how it affects your life. So for weeks after my wife reading him the story, my son was asking me questions like, well, like if the black hole was smaller, would the dad still be alive when the boy comes back? Couldn't the boy maybe not have gotten so close to the black hole, and then maybe when he came back it would only be 20 years later and the dad is still alive, it's not 10,000. So he was really trying to think about the ideas driven by this emotional reaction to a story that at its core was scientific.